Hello and good morning, evening or afternoon, depending on when you are tuning into our latest episode of Susty Talk, our series of video interviews to keep us all feeling a little bit more connected during COVID and beyond. I'm delighted to have someone I don't believe I've interviewed on the call today, and that is Jeff Hamilton, who was recently appointed as Chief Executive Officer at Purina for the EMEA region. So a very good morning to you, Jeff. How are you?
Well, Sarah, thanks for having me.
And thanks for coming on. Whereabouts are you dialing in from?
So I'm dialing in from Switzerland, where we have a bit of a rainy day here today.
Yeah, equally drizzly here too. And as we were saying off the call, just crazy weather all around. It seems either drizzle or heat waves for all at the moment. So extra timely that we are here really on this call. And for this series, we've spoken to a lot of sustainability professionals, but it's always great to get a CEO or another executive professional on board just to look really at how they interact with the company's sustainability and CSR work. So we often get questions about board level buy-in or top down versus bottom up and all of these kind of topics. So it'd be great to hear to start off with a bit about how you interact with the company's sustainability work as CEO.
Yeah, great. So it's a good place to start. So ultimately, I'm responsible for the strategy of the Purina EMEA business. And of course, sustainability is deeply embedded in our strategies and in our priorities. We have a whole program called Purina in Society, which is our corporate social responsibility approach. And our sustainability work is deeply embedded in that. That work is informed by many different stakeholders, from employees to consumers to suppliers to veterinarians. And so we really take all that into account, and then we build our strategies from there. And so certainly one of my key responsibilities to make sure that we deliver on our ambitions, and one of those is certainly to minimize our environmental impact. All of this, of course, is against a larger goal, which we have, is to create a more positive future for pets, their owners, and the wider society.
Great, and I want to come into how some of that is quantified, because that's obviously a qualitative and pretty wide-reaching vision, and something that a lot of people are focusing on at the moment is net zero. So we covered back when Nestle, which is Purina's parent company, set a global net zero target for 2050, and subsequently interim emissions reductions milestones of 20% reduction by 2025 and 50% by 2030. So it would be great to hear how that gets translated down to the brands, and specifically what that means for the Purina brand.
Yeah, so a really important starting point for us was last year we did a materiality analysis to identify what matters most to our stakeholders. One of the things very, very clear from the conclusions there was that net zero is one of the main priorities for our stakeholders. And as such, we will certainly contribute to Nestle's ambition to achieve net zero by 2050. And here we've already started that journey. So we are starting that journey now. And we're trying to get a better and better understanding every day, every week, of what we need to do to travel that journey. We've already made some important steps forward. For example, we've already been able to convert our factories to renewable energy to run our operations. So that's been an important step forward. And we're learning every day and making progress every day. By no means do we have all the solutions just yet, but I'm not sure very many people do.
For sure. And you mentioned their energy use in factories. So I'd love to know if that is the sort of main source of emissions, or if that sits somewhere else. So what are the other big buckets of emissions?
One of the things we've certainly learned is our ingredients when you look end to end, particularly our ingredients are an important source of emissions. For example, the protein that we're using today, we need to find lower emission ways of either raising the existing proteins. Another option would be for us to shift to proteins that are naturally lower emission emitting. And then another real possibility is for us to start exploring what are some alternate proteins that we could put into our foods. I've already mentioned the factory, so that's another key source of emissions that we need to progress on, and we've made already very good progress through the through the renewable energy that's going into those factories. And one other opportunity for us is related to transportation, and the more both in terms of the vehicles we use and the kilometers they are traveling. So one really good example is wherever we can be more efficient in our supply chain, the fewer kilometers, the less emissions. So for example, we've been working with some of our key retailers on how we can develop more direct ship, so it never goes to another warehouse. It goes straight from our factory to their distribution center. We've been doing that very successfully in France recently with Zooplus, one of our larger customers. And the other thing that we can do to help on supply chain is to increasingly move more and more to local production and local sourcing. And as our business builds and expands, that's certainly one of the key factors we consider as we build new sites.
And I'd love to come on to some of those sourcing conundrums that you've mentioned in more detail, but I wanted to ask as well, so there's reductions through efficiency, through alternative materials and alternative fuels, but is there also offsetting in Purina's like net zero plans?
So we haven't gone to offsetting just yet. We're going to try to solve as many of make as much progress on emissions as we can. We haven't ruled out the possibility of offsetting, but that is not yet part of our plan.
Got it. I just always like to ask, there's such a varied approach to this, and I think this is a question that a lot of executives and sustainability professionals will be grappling with at the moment. But as I mentioned, I did want to come back to some of the things you've mentioned there about sustainable ingredients that are actually really detailed in a new CSR report from Purina, which is what this call was set off the back of, really. And you talk there about alternative proteins and how that can decarbonize supply chains, but also meet changing consumer demands for what they want for their pets and the carbon impact of their lifestyles, really. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how the company's responding to those trends.
Yeah, so we do see alternate proteins as something that's likely to be an increasingly more important part of the way we formulate our products. We're already doing some experimenting today. For example, we've launched a product called Beyond Nature's Protein, just in Switzerland right now, because this is a very new concept for us, but this is a product that features both plant and insect proteins as protein sources in these products. And so that's a very new territory for us. And I'd say so far the consumer response has been encouraging. So we'll continue to experiment with those kinds of proteins as well as other proteins. Other plant-based proteins is certainly something that we're considering. We're doing some very early work on cell-based. And when we look at the whole startup community, there's a tremendous amount of innovation and money going into new novel proteins. And we actually are looking at many of those companies in terms of partnerships through a program that's called Unleashed, which is essentially an internal accelerator incubator. And so that gives us a really good pipeline of who's doing what in this interesting space. So it's certainly an area we're interested in, and we will continue to move forward.
Like, to me, it just looks like it's getting as interesting for pets as it is for people. So after seeing like crickets in Sainsbury's for us in the UK last year, we've seen insect-based pet foods and things like that. But I guess something as well that sustainability professionals will ask is how you can look to make sure that these alternatives are more sustainable on a life cycle basis. And I'm presuming that the answer is good life cycle analysis and materiality.
Well, certainly that helps. And that's an important part of it, but it's also for us, it also just comes down to responsible sourcing and making sure we really understand end to end where our products are coming from, how they're being raised, under what conditions, both from an agricultural perspective as well as from a societal perspective. And just to make sure that in the end, we're really, really comfortable about where our ingredients are coming from. I'll just give you one example that 99% of the soya we used just last year was both traceable and responsibly sourced. And so this will be something we'll continue to do more of. Another interesting example is we We have a new product that's just recently on the market since last year, which is made it's actually an upcycled product made from spent grains from the brewery sector that we have translated into a pet treat known as Aventuros, and that's on the market and doing very well. So we're really excited about the possibilities there too.
That's so interesting, because already there is like beer for humans made from recycled bread. So yet again, it's just going down to pets as well. So we've talked there about alternative protein sourcing, but I wanted to come on to some of the sourcing of core ingredients already. The CSR report talks a lot about scaling up regenerative methods for key ingredients. And we've seen a lot about this in, I'd say, particularly fashion and cotton. And rubber over the last year, but not so much for these kinds of feedstocks. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how the company is going about this.
Yeah, so certainly regenerative agriculture is a key part of our sustainability program. We use a lot of agricultural products, but particularly cereals in our foods. We've been working with partners, suppliers, farmers, local stakeholders to support the transition from cultural to regenerative agriculture practices, knowing that this will then protect and restore the natural resources such as soil, water, biodiversity. And we have two good examples of some partnerships that we've already started up. In the UK, we are one of the partners of LENS, maybe you're familiar with that, which is the Landscape Enterprise Network, and we're using this as it relates to our cereal supply base. The aim of LENS is the deployment of regenerative agriculture practices to enhance biodiversity and to reduce and sequester carbon at scale. And so they've been a really good partner for us. We're learning together and making good progress. So that's, I think, what it'll take. We have a similar relationship in France with a partner called Living Soils Initiative, doing very similar work and helping them to create more scale in regenerative agriculture, measuring the impact that they're having on the soil, and ultimately to do what we can to help scale up the transition from conventional to regenerative crops. So those are a couple good examples of the work we're already doing, and I'm sure there'll be more in the future.
We often get that question, sort of, how do you take regenerative from a one farm approach to something bigger and scale it? So from what you've just said, it sounds like that collaboration, that partnership, and getting those case study results is just really important in the first instance.
Very true. Yeah, and we need more of it. I think one of the things that we really need to work to have bigger impact in terms of the regenerative products that we're using in our materials is we need that regenerative agriculture industry to scale up so there's more availability of the materials.
For sure. Well, Jeff, that's all the questions I have written down, and I think we've covered a lot there, from top line strategy to farm level changes and innovation. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for your interest, Sarah. I enjoyed talking to you.